It won't take but a minute. See, even she approves. Well, since we've come this far, I thought it was a good idea to go ahead and check the valve adjustments on this thing, being that I know nothing about this motor. You know, I'd looked at a couple of videos online of people adjusting the valve, primarily on these little motors. And I thought that for some people out there who'd never done it before, that there might be an easier way just to give someone an idea how to do it. Not necessarily the easiest way, but I think for someone who's kind of new, it's probably the simplest way to ensure that you don't make any mistakes. So I thought we'd check it out and do it that way. First of all, on this little car, I finally was able to find the timing mark. It was kind of covered up with, I'm sure, just rust and grease and dirt, and then at one time it looked like somebody had tried to shoot some paint over it, but I finally found the mark, and I'm not sure you can see it. One thing I got around here right now that would write was a carpenter's pencil. But that right there, this motor is on top dead center. And for those that are not quite sure whether this is top dead center or this is at the top of the exhaust stroke, easiest way to do that, mainly if you have a motor that actually had a distributor in it, it was running before you started checking the valves, you know the distributor's in the right place. And knowing your firing order and which plug wire came off number one, you know on this distributor cap, on this particular motor, you can identify it by this little jut out sticking there. You know that that's this wire right here is number one. And if you pull this cap off, you're going to notice where the rotor is pointing. See, that rotor right there is pointing to number one and is getting ready to fire that cylinder, which means it's at top dead center, and that spark is getting ready to ignite that gas fuel mixture. All right, and while I was here, I also noticed, like I said, this is number one and this is top dead center. That valve right there is probably pretty close. Definitely close enough where it probably wouldn't clatter. But this intake is actually too loose. I can actually, there's movement in this push rod. So this probably would have made some noise. Actually, it would have made noise. And if this motor didn't have such a loud exhaust leak, it would have been probably more apparent. But the exhaust leak was so loud, it kind of covered up everything else. So this is definitely a good time to go ahead and go through this and adjust these valves. It won't take very long, and kind of walk you through it. It's pretty easy. This isn't brain surgery, but it is important that you adjust them when they're on the heel of the cam, so that way you get a proper adjustment. So I'm going to get this camera set up, and then we'll start adjusting them in firing order. And I know this is where there's going to be a difference of opinions, because I've seen anywhere people say a quarter of a turn, a half a turn, 3/4 of a turn, 1 turn, but I'm going by the factory manual back from 1967. What you're trying to do is get that plunger down into the middle of its travel. So they call for 1 turn, and that's what we're going to do here. But even a quarter of a turn will work. But over the years, as you have wear inside this ball and socket, the tip of this push rod, and even the tip of the valve, all that adds up. And that's the purpose of the hydraulic lifters. That plunger can keep extending out, taking that slack up, keeping the valve train quiet. All right, number one. Man, the best way I found doing it is actually hold up, push up on the rod, take the slack out of this ball assembly, push down on, you know, that way it'll push down on top of that valve stem, and then drop it down into it. That way, once that stops, you know you're done. And then you're one full turn or half turn, however you want to do it. But that way you're not actually, you don't have that spring tension. You're not working against that spring tension and not know it. If you're starting up and pushing down, and once that thing stops, you know you're not compressing that spring. And don't let the weight of your socket sit there. You see? See, it's pushing down. It's actually helping take up some of that slack. Make a turn, pull the wrench off, and see if you still got slack. All right, then we're going to go one turn. All right, same with this next one. All right, one turn. Sometimes it'll peel up. These lock nuts will peel up a little thread. And I just want, if it is, shows up, I just soon get it out. These are so old and wore out, they're probably not going to do that. All right. You notice this tab here on the timing cover, and you'll see that mark right here with the tip of that screwdriver. If you line up the notch in this pulley down here, that's 0 degrees top dead center. I just put a pencil mark with a carpenter's pencil right here just to make it a little bit easier to see. Because this is a 6-cylinder motor, and it takes 2 complete revolutions for this motor to run through its firing order for 1 cycle. That means a piston fires every 120 degrees of this crank. So what I did was I took the circumference of this pulley, and I just used a piece of strap that I had off a package that was delivered because I could wrap it around. I measured the circumference and I divided it by 3, and then I marked it off. And you'll notice as I turn the wheel, I've got 3 evenly spaced marks around here. That's 120 degrees. And because this doesn't have a fan clutch, the fan is bolted straight to the pump, and this little motor has the plugs out, I can turn it over with the fan. And you'll see this mark coming up. All right, that should be 120 degrees of crankshaft rotation. All right, now the firing order on this motor is 153624. So if you want to confirm that you're actually going in the right direction and the right way, you follow these wires out. Remember, this was number 1, this will be number 5. So we should have a rotor on this distributor. This should be pointing approximately in this area right here. So we're ready to go and adjust the valves on number 5. And pretty simple and self-explanatory. A little 6-cylinder motor. Front of the motor is number 1, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to adjust the number 5 now. One turn. A little bit too tight. Again, it's always better to be conservative than to be aggressive. Just dust to the stuff. All right. One turn. We'll turn this motor over another 120 degrees, line up my mark. All right. Number 3. Yeah, these old lock nuts are wore out. Wore out. All right. Half. 1. And this isn't brain surgery, and it's, if you're off a few degrees one way or another when you're running that nut down, it's not going to hurt anything. Just roughly 1 complete turn. But again, you can go a half and it'll work also. And you realize it has to, there's a touch to it, because you can push down and compress that plunger, because right now with the engine not running, that's just spring pressure, and you can overcome that spring pressure. So don't mistake it and keep running it down, running it down, running it down. I know some people say you can turn these push rods, and then when they stop turning, you know you've taken up the slack. That's not true. You can push and turn these push rods with your fingers almost all the way until you bottom out that plunger. So it's better to be under than over. Under, it's going to be loud and clattery, but you're not damaging anything. If you get it too tight, first of all, you're going to have a motor that might not hit on that cylinder at all, and depending on how far you went down and what type of motor, you might end up having a valve sticking up that makes contact with a piston. There you go. Now you got to pull the head off. All right. Half. Right. Another 120 degrees. That should be number 6. Just get enough. Do a 1 turn. Do 2 halves here. Half. One. Good enough. Half. Another 120. All right. Holy smoke. It's a bit warm out today. Now we're going to work on number 2. And all we have left is 4. And we can confirm that we're in the right position because we have 1, 5, 3, 6, 2. So we should have our rotor pointing virtually straight back. And we do. Just where you can pick up on it and set it back down in that plunger. Top of that lifter. Just you feel it. Again, it's better to be on the conservative side. All right. 1 turn. One more. All right, we'll turn it another 120, and then that'll leave it at number 4. And that should be all of them. And what we might do, I think I have everything out here. We might hit this thing with a compression test again and just by chance see if anything changed. Oh yeah. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and get that valve cover and get it put back on real quick, and or actually just set it down on top of it. That's all I'm gonna do. And then stick around. We'll run that compression gauge across these cylinders again to see if anything changed. Well, it actually does look a little better, in all honesty. I don't like using the tip of this thing. It's so much. Not only that, I'm putting so much pressure down on the gauge, and I know I'm affecting it because I can see it drop when I pull it back. But 140 to 150, that's actually pretty good. That's not too bad. And with that exhaust leak fixed, the motor should be a little bit quieter, because there was a couple of those lifters that felt like that they were going to be loose, and you probably would have heard them if it weren't for that exhaust leak. And I had a couple of those nuts. They had become so wore out because they're nothing more than a lock nut. The top of that nut is kind of squished in, kind of elongated, so it bites into the threads as you thread it down onto that rocker stud. But after they've been put on and off and on and off so many times, they don't hold very well. So just engine vibration, sometimes they'll back off. So probably a few of them had backed off. It's not the most ideal way of doing it, but you can actually take that nut, set it down on a steel hard surface, take a hammer, a flat hammer, and a flat faced hammer, and just strike the top of it gently. It doesn't have to be that hard. And you'll kind of roll the top of that nut down, and when you put it back on there, it'll bite. Again, it's not the most ideal way, but until you get a new nut, it's better than having one back off. So, well, there you go, guys. I'm waiting for some parts. Once they arrive, we're going to pressure wash. My pressure washer did show up, and then I'll kind of show you the one that I picked and why. And then we'll start cleaning up this engine compartment. We'll degrease and pressure wash this engine. And I'll pull off the alternator and probably the clutch bracket for that bell crank, the starter, the coil over here. They'll probably pull the plug, the distributor. And because I'm going to change the oil, I'll probably pull the oil filter off. And we'll try to paint this motor. I'll pull the fan off the front of it. It's not going to be a show car, but we can clean it up and paint it the Chevrolet orange. And then I'll pull the valve cover off, and I'll actually take it down. A buddy of mine has a bead blasting cabinet. And I'll clean this thing up, maybe try to sand on a little bit to make it look a little bit nicer. Put a nice shiny coat of paint. I found the original duplicate of the original sticker. It had just a plain old sticker, and the only thing it said was 250. The ones that came on the truck. The cars had some other ones that had like 250 and then like the horsepower rating, but I think the ones on the truck were just a plain 250. I found one of those, and I found the decal for the air cleaner. Do the same to the air cleaner, just the exterior of it, because the inside looks like new. And paint it maybe like a satin or semi-gloss type black, something that looks pretty close to original. Put a new decal on it, and maybe decal, god dang it, I can't even talk today. Detail out that starter, clean it up, do the same with the distributor, and then we'll put points, condenser, the rotor cap, and new wires and plugs in this thing. Clean up the alternator, maybe even shoot that silver just to make it kind of look new. Maybe paint the pulley on the water pump black again, and clean up these fenders best we can inside. I'm going to try to preserve these factory assembly writings, and basically just detail it out, make it look nice. And then we're going to work on the brakes, and we're going to add power brakes to this thing. And as soon as I find a double pulley for the water pump and a double pulley for the alternator, I found a set of new brackets that I'm going to order, and we're going to add power steering, and we'll show the whole upgrade. And then whatever parts we find that actually are the best to swap over, so if someone else wants to do it, we'll have some links and part numbers and how it worked and how it turned out. So there's a whole lot we're doing, and that's just because we're here in my yard. As soon as I'm able to use that shop of my friends, we're going to probably start doing some other things like the rocker panels and things like that. So anybody who stuck around long enough to listen to me babble on, I am very grateful. And y'all stick around, and y'all have a good one.